This video you are about to see, just be patient.
The majority of African Americans that lived here were brought over here.
No,
No.
that's not economically sound.
What do you mean by it's not economically sound?
So what I'm saying is, people were already here. Does it make sense to go all the way to this other continent to bring people on a boat when we know that half of your stock is gonna die? You wouldn't do that.
So how many people do you think were brought over from Africa on slave ships? Because that definitely happened.
I don't believe it.
What do you mean you don't believe it?
I don't believe that story. You think this whole land was empty? No, there were natives here.
Right.
But today we're taught that natives is some other people. No, natives are the melanated African being that has come here since the beginning of the Mali Empire. We're talking about 14th, 13th century. We had already come here from Africa.
Really?
Oh yeah, we had already come here. You know, maybe people were brought over as slaves, but I don't think that the black people in America came from Africa on slave ships. I believe the people that were here were slowly conquered. First they got the East Coast, and then they started spreading out west, little by little conquering. And when you conquer a tribe, what do? You enslave them. They're POWs, right?
Okay.
That's what you do.
But I'm still confused. There's a great history of slave ships being brought over from Africa.
History is his story.
Right.
What about my story? Is my story not valid?
But if you do 23andMe on from out,
23andMe?
Well, that's
either way. If you take black people here in America and you do their DNA sample and it point back to Africa, what does that say? It says black people in America are Africans. Now the argument is, were we brought here or were we already here? Did we bring ourselves here or did the white man bring us here? You see, when you say the white man brought us here, what you're doing is you're removing our ability to transport ourselves. You're saying, oh, we didn't know anything about boats. That's what you're trying to tell me. You're trying to tell me that we didn't know that there was a landmass here. Go look at the primary source. You got here, we met black people. When we got the Caribbean, we met black people. You think the Caribbean is right next to America and they weren't in America?
That's interesting.
Doesn't make any sense. I mean, when you go and you look at real European history, right, would believe that if they took a bath, it was bad.
Right.
They didn't even want to change their clothes. They thought that dirty was purity. When we talk about the Moors going into Spain and into Europe, the stories in the history, our history, says that when we met the so-called Caucasian, he was sleeping in the barn with the animals, and we told him, no, you can't sleep in the barn with animals. We taught them etiquette. We taught them running water. We brought that technology to Europe. Now, if we brought the technology to Europe that saved Europe from the Black Plague, you mean to tell me that if we saved the white race, that we weren't already in America already? When we brought the technology? When Rome was dependent on Africa for food? Remember when the Black Plague hit Rome? The cause was one of the officials was stealing the grain that was coming from Africa. So there was famine, hit Rome. If your source of sustenance is from Africa, how are you superior? You're not. You get your food from me. So if you get your food from me, who's more likely to travel this globe? Me, I'm the source of food. And that's the first thing you need to survive on this planet.
Call hello Yahweh Bashem Shai Bashem Kakodash. Double honors unto the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who do rule well. Shalom to you of us who are hopeful. Shalom to the elect. We got a lot to unpack here, so let's get right to it. Initially, when I saw the opening clip, it was on TikTok, but because I prefer to use original footage, I went right to YouTube, and just as I thought the conversation in the opening clip was edited, I would have surmised there was some trimming done in the interest of time, but as far as the exchange I wanted to respond to, nothing of importance was missing. For those of you interested in seeing the episode in its entirety, for whatever reason, I'll add a link to the original broadcast in the description box. For those of you who have already seen it, courtesy of Joe Rogan's channel, of course, feel free to comment if you feel like there is more to discuss after watching this video. All that being said, now I didn't catch the name of the melanated gentleman. I believe it's Hotep Jesus, which would explain a lot. To be honest, I skimmed through the YouTube interview because really I was only interested in finding the same key points, really the main points that resonated with me in the spirit. In any event, Mr. Hotep was mostly right, but there was a few things though. One that jumped out at me was his questioning of history. His story is what he called it, which is a well-known idiom, if you will. Whenever so-called people of color refute the details regarding historic events, that's the so-called white man insists is actual fact. He said, what about my story? Doesn't my story matter? And my answer to that is not if it isn't filtered through or grounded by scripture, which is not only the oldest living document, it is the oldest and most accurate historical record the world has to date. It is a well-known fact that one of the resources Cristobal Colon, aka Christopher Columbus, used to find Los Niños del Indio, the children of God as he identified them, the truth biblical Hebrew Israelites, was 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter in the Apocrypha. It explains where the northern kingdom of Israel went after fleeing Assyrian captivity, speaking to and backing up the gentleman's point. 2nd Ezra 13, we'll start at verse 40, and it reads, those are the 10 tribes, again speaking of the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom being Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, today regarded as the Negroes, the Afro-Americans, the Haitians, and the West Indians, respectively. The northern kingdom, PK, the 10 lost tribes, are known today as the so-called Latinos, Hispanics, and the Native Indians, which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king. Speaking to Hosea, who was the last king of the Israelite kingdom of Israel, whom Salmanazar, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. Speaking to the aforementioned Assyrian in captivity, or Assyrian exile, if you will, circa 8th century, about 722 BCE, before Common Era. But they took his counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statues which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow places of the river, for the Most High then shewed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half, and the same region is called Arsareth, which we know today to be America, and I'll show proof of that in a second. Then dwelt they there until the latter time, and now when they shall begin to come. The excerpt I like to use to prove Arsareth is in fact America is taken from the Jewish Encyclopedia, the 1906 edition. And I go there because it uses the same scripture to support its claim. It says this: the name of the land beyond the great river, far away from the habitation of man, in which the 10 tribes of Israel will dwell, observing the laws of Moses until the time of the restoration, according to the, it says 4 here, and I'm going to say that speaking to the 4th book, or what the scholars call the 4th book of Ezra, 1345. Columbus identified America with this land. See K. Searling's Christopher Columbus, translated by Dr. C. Groves, page 15. The name it has been suggested by Schiller Shenetzi is taken from Deuteronomy 29, 24 to 27, because they forsook the covenant of the Lord and went and served other gods, and the Lord rooted them out of their land, Slakia, and cast them into another land, Eres Harat, another land. In the Hebrew, Akar Ratazah, which is synonymous with the land of Arsareth. Arsareth in 2nd Ezra 13 and 45, as this day. Did I mention it was the so-called Jews who were mainly responsible for facilitating the ships that assisted in the transatlantic slave trade that brought the southern kingdom to Arsareth? We'll get into that shortly. Also, there's the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia that says this: Arsareth, the King James Version. This is the land to which the 10 tribes were deported. Again, 2nd Ezra 13 and 45. It is described as another land lying a year and a half's journey beyond the river, i.e. the Euphrates. It probably answers the Hebrews, Eretz, Akereth, Deuteronomy again 29:28, and Josephus's time, the people were still believed to be there in countless numbers. Today, those 10 tribes are the so-called Guatemalans, the Panamanians, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Northern American Indians, the Seminole Indians, the Chileans, Argentinians, Colombians, Uruguayans, and Mexicans all make up the Northern Kingdom. Isaiah 25 and 7 tells us that these false names, denominations, and political designations are the covering cast and veil spread over the people of the earth, leaving them blind to their true identity, the truth which is the Bible and who truly rules over them. And he, the he being the Heavenly Father Yahweh, will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people and the veil that is spread over all nations. Mountains in the Bible, when not in the literal sense, speaks to kingdoms, speaks to governments or a rulership. The rulership in this case is the so-called white man, so called because no one is white. He is actually red. When he laughs, cries, is angry or embarrassed, his true color shines through. It is a so-called white man that has ruled exclusively since regaining the global power seat since the Renaissance period. Renaissance meaning rebirth, speaking to the researchers of the so-called white man's rulership over the earth. It is the top banking families, the elite globalists, and their ruling class lineage who are responsible for the distinction of people, the naming of countries and continents we are left subject to today. When you use political designations like African, really you are speaking to the children of Ham, who also left their mark in America. Most notably are the artifacts of Olmec, better known as the Olmec statues, but that is not us. We are the children of Shem. We are the children of promise, the Hebrew Israelites, who too have left our own historical proofs of descent and lineage, like the Lost Lunar stones would be a good example. Lost Lunar stones that were found or located in New Mexico. See, that is the common mistake made even by our own people. The whole world at one time were inhabited by so-called people of color, but the amount of pigment one has in their skin does not determine kinship or a lineage among people. Now, two dogs may have the same black colored coats, and the fact that they are dogs might be the only thing they have in common, because one is a pit bull and the other is a Rottweiler. Two different species of the same animal, and that is the train of thought there. Ezekiel, the 36th chapter, brings this very same truth to light. Ezekiel 31 and 6 says this: all the fowls of heaven made their nests in his boughs, and under his branches did all the beasts of the field bring forth their young. And under his shadow dwelt all great nations. Boughs, branches, and even twigs biblically speaks to a son or sons, grandsons, children, members of a group, a line or lineage. Jeremiah 23 and 5 speaks of a righteous branch raised unto David. Isaiah 11 and 1 says, a branch shall grow out of his roots. Genesis 49 and 22 is another good precept here. And it says this: Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. Fruitful speaking to Joseph's descendants, Ephraim and Manasseh. Their inheritance and abundance in numbers, which Yahweh gave the increase. Today we know Ephraim and Manasseh to speak to the so-called Puerto Ricans and Cubans. In reference to Ephraim's fertility alone, it's a well-known fact that there are more so-called Puerto Ricans in New York City than there are so-called Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico itself. Both Ephraim and Manasseh were inhabitants of islands, i.e. located by water. Christopher Columbus arrived at what he called Puerto Rico in 1493. Originally, he had named it San Juan Bautista in honor of John the Baptist, but because of all the gold that they witnessed Ephraim extracting from the river, it was known thereafter as Puerto Rico, Spanish for rich port. Rich meaning abundant and fruitful. The name Cuba comes from the Taino language and may be translated where fertile land is abundant, Cobayo, or great place, Coabana. The daughters spread over the wall is in reference to the way the branches eventually crept over the wall and laid to protect them. Spiritually, the laws, statutes, and commandments, separating them from the other trees as so not to be mixed, physically tainted by their philosophies and their seed. Philosophies spiritually, of course. Precisely the same way some of the daughters of Ephraim sprang that racial boundary, for lack of a better terminology, and intermingled with the Spaniard conquistadors. Now, we know a vast majority of our people were conquered by these same conquistadors and were not only raped, but robbed and pillaged. In any event, Yahweh had willed it that the line of Ephraim, which we know is through his men, particularly speaks to, obviously it speaks to all of mankind. You find the line and the lineage of a nation through the man. That's Numbers 1 and 18 is the precept there. Well, it remained untouched and preserved. In this verse, the bow is actually referencing people, and in the scriptures, man can also be referred to, Salakia, as trees. When it is said that Adam and Eve hid themselves amongst the trees in the Garden of Eden, in the scriptures, for instance, means they hid themselves amongst the other nations and, of course, their philosophies. That's Genesis 3 and 8. Ezekiel 31 and 7. Thus was he fair in his greatness, in the length of his branches, for his root was by great waters. Again, this is in reference to Adam, properly the Adamites. He was greater than all the other trees. The cedars in the garden of Yahweh could not hide him. Ezekiel is referring back to Adam. The fir trees were not like his bows, making the point that even though they were a melanated people like Ham and his offspring, we have a different spirit from them. And the chestnut trees were not like his branches, nor any tree in the garden of Yahweh was like unto him in his beauty. I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of Yahweh envied him. The other nations envy us because of that spirit, because of our understanding, and because of Yahweh's promise made to us, and they still do today. For those of you new to the faith, I'll put up the 12 tribes chart in post so you can see how the biblical name and nations today match up. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that that 12 tribes chart was comprised by Elder or High Priest Ariah. Double honors onto him. And, in light of hearing of his passing and of the exchange that some of you that are, who never knew him, like myself, but yet are ready to pass judgment. And I always say this to the brothers, that only a man that is dealing with the Spirit, or the Spirit is dealing with him, could have ever comprised such a intense and accurate chart. But I'll leave it there. Matter of fact, I'll go through some of the breakdowns and prophecies of Moses regarding the tribes. Thinking back, you naysayers would be hard-pressed to refute them, because the prophecies don't lie, and they have already been made and manifest. Speaking of the so-called Mexicans, who we know to be the children of Issachar, the spirit of deciphering the time by the stars was given to the tribe by the Heavenly Father, which of course was essential in navigating the ocean at that time. First Chronicles 12 and 32 is the precept there. 1 Kings 9 and 27 tells us that Hiram, the Phoenician king of Tyre, whose friendship with King David was extended to Solomon after King David had passed, sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, with the servants of Solomon. Because the Hamites were better navigators of the sea, they accompanied the Israelite seamen to help guide them per voyage. Ergo, Israel was already well acquainted with how to get to the Americas and the Caribbean. Again, to speak to Hotep, Jesus's point. Something to also remember, the Moors were Israelites who practiced their own or Islamic principles, and The knowledge of seafaring and navigation was equally exchanged because they were brothers. Concerning the 10 lost tribes, let's not forget, because of their understanding of the constellations, Issachar, i.e., the Aztecs, and Zebulon, who we know today to speak to the Mayans, had kept contact and initially would meet each other in the mountains to carry out their observances of worship. We could pull that from Deuteronomy 33 and 18. I'll go there. I'll go into that. And it says this, and of Zebulon he said, rejoice, Zebulon, in thy going out, and Issachar in thy tents. They shall call the people onto the mountain. There they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness, for they shall suck of the abundance of the seas and of treasures hid in the sand. Wanting to continue the same principles of worship their fathers had practiced before the Assyrian captivity, built the pyramids of the sun and moon, which depended on a perfect alignment of the stars when they inhabited the new land of Arsareth. What that proves, it was we so-called Negroes, Latinos, and natives who were the Israelites responsible for building the pyramids in Egypt. I include the Negroes as well to make a point that is often overlooked. The so-called Negroes and natives are the same people. They are just from different tribes. The Negroes being in Europe and the East, the 10 tribes being in the Americas and the Caribbean were obviously in different places geographically before being brought together to serve out our sentence in Babylon the Great, aka America, in accordance with the curses of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, and Jeremiah 50 and 33. And it says this, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Judah, that's the northern and southern kingdoms, were oppressed together, and all that took them captives held them fast. They refused to let them go. If common sense does in fact dictate, then it's easy to understand how brotherhood tribes would not only share the same phenotype, it would be second nature to mix and mingle, kin with kin, sharing much, including seed. So possessing the same physical attributes, be it skin color, thick nose, thick lips, straight or kinky hair, in some instances, is a given. Furthermore, the indigenous of the Americas, before being overrun by Columbus and his conquistadors, and the rest of the Edomites that followed, were more melanated, better yet, were a dark-skinned people like the entire rest of the world at one time. A good source of proof there would be the stills that are still in circulation on the net of the biblical Reubenites, i.e. the Seminole Indians. Further historical proof is the old slave posters that were used to solicit so-called Negroes on the cargo slave ships for sale. If the intent was to traffic Negroes, why is it they depicted dark-skinned men dressed in so-called native Indian garb? For those of you late to the dinner table, it was in 1682 that the state of Virginia joined so-called Native Americans and so-called Africans, really Negroes. And I'll put up the Zondervan Bible Dictionary and the Young's Compact Bible Dictionary, their definitions to show the differentiation there. But it was Virginia who joined the two into one racial category to be recognized as quote-unquote Negroes and other slaves. Let's go to the Zondervan Bible Dictionary and then the Young's, as I stated, to make it all make sense and bring this thing home. Then we'll go into why the nation of Edom, Amalek included, would find it more profitable to transport slaves from West Africa to the Americas, knowing the hazards and against their will. In the Zondervan's Bible Dictionary, the 1963 edition, it gives this description concerning Ham and the so-called African nations. Ham, who we know to be the forefather of the Hamites, today they are referred to as the African nations. To say Africans were the captives of the transatlantic slave trade is not accurate. Those subjected to captivity were in fact Israelites. Many were taken from the Ivory Coast of West Africa, and many still remain there today. Many in Ghana, in Nigeria, Liberia, to name a few, and the rest still are scattered all across the continent. Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood, he became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes. Again, referring to you Israelites, you children of Shem and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the Egyptians, the biblical children of Mizraim or Matazariam in the Hebrew, Ethiopians, the descendants of Kawash in the Hebrew, or Cush, the Libyans, who I believe are the children of Put in North Africa, and Canaanites, the children of Canaan, the Canaan being the son of Ham, the so-called South Africans. Given this description, it is easy to say regarding the transatlantic slave trade, the amount of melanin, i.e. pigment in the skin, did not play a factor. It had to be more than that, and even more obvious still, there was a clear and definitive distinction amongst the said people being gathered up to be exported. Also overtly obvious is the folks over at Zondervan knew something the other so-called authoritative publications were not privy to, which I doubt were. But in any event, were negligent in revealing or were cautioned to conceal. Zondervan being a well-known and reputable source, and the fact that they don't provide any explanation for their assessment, that alone speaks volumes to the factual validity of this definition. And if that wasn't enough, the Young's Compact Bible Dictionary, 1984 edition, pretty much shares the same sentiment. Ham, a son of Noah and father of Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. See further on each of these four. While they may have all been dark-skinned, they were not the forefathers of the Negroid races, but rather of peoples associated with Egypt in the north of the continent of Africa. I guess Pat and Bernard Zondervan and G. Douglas Young were roomies. Yeah, that's it. In any event, and by the way, 23andMe and Ancestry.com and the like, who offer DNA tests to pinpoint your ethnicity. Let me put it like this: the science to pinpoint your racial makeup, which is not the same as ethnicity, the science to pinpoint your genetic makeup, like which tribe you descended from in Sierra Leone, that does not exist. And if it does, they will never make it available to you. You know who owns Ancestry.com? The Blackstone Group. And who is a major shareholder in Blackstone? The Rothschilds. You know who is a major shareholder in 23andMe? Richard Branson, another elitist and one percenter. The Church of Latter-day Saints own a major genealogy website, FamilySearch.org, I believe it's named, which provides free access to historical archives. And on top of that, the LDS, which is the Latter-day Saints, claim to have the records of over 12 billion deceased people, some going all the way back to the 1st century. All that being said, Ancestry.com, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, etc., are the last people you want to willingly give your DNA to, especially if you are a Hebrew Israelite. The fact that these people have a better understanding than you of who you are genetically, and that we know Esau's highest source of income is war and bioterrorism. You don't want to give the overseer the tools to cripple and kill you under the spread of another man-made disease or under the guise of another pandemic. Psalm 64:6 comes to mind there, and I'm going to get that. And it reads, they search out iniquities, meaning Esau, Edom, starting with the top banking families and the elite globalists who propose to rule over us on down. Make it a practice to devise and commit atrocities and abominations against the Lord and his people here on earth. They accomplish a diligent search. Not only do they work hard at it, they have perfected it, and they have it down to a science. Pardon the pun there. Both the inward thought of every one of them and the heart is deep. Simply put, they are cunning and calculating in their efforts. Another example is the HSBC, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, British multinational investment bank and financial service holding company, founded by a quote-unquote Scotsman. Really, he was an Edomite. In any event, HSBC is the largest bank in Europe and I believe it to be the 7th largest in the world, originating in Hong Kong when it was a British colony. Now, it got its upstart in opium trading and has been accused of everything from an excess in deforestation to money laundering for drug dealers and financing terrorism. Their ads say that in the future, your DNA will be your data. Simply put, they are collecting your DNA. And what do you suppose for? I mean, biometrics and maybe AI, or those are two good guesses, but both speak to Revelation, the 13th chapter, verse 16 on down, and the implementation of the MOTB, the mark of the beast. Their ads show a finger primed for fingerprinting with black ink. The finger in question is the index finger, the same finger most nurses and doctors visits prick for taking a blood sample. The same finger you prick when making a blood oath. On that finger in their ads, and forgive me, but it's the spirit. There's a QR code. For those not up to speed, 3 of the 4 corners in the QR code have a 6. You can do the math. I could take it a step further and point out the relation of carbon, the element of life, and melanin itself, and how it relates to those 3 6s. But I'm going to stop here. I don't want to get too far off the point. Ezekiel 28:3. Behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that they can hide from thee. Speaking to Esau, who has the resources to excavate, go on expeditions, travel the world, do archaeological digs, who essentially has the means and the know-how to search out all things. As I said, Esau is in the possession of all sorts of records, especially the ones they have no plan of releasing to you, the common public. I digress, but the last point I wanted to make, and then we'll close out. Maybe I'll revisit this lesson at a later date and go through the interview in depth, albeit it is 3 years old. But the last point I wanted to make was the indigenous to the land of America, they were in fact slowly conquered. Yes, I can agree to that. Were so-called blacks also slave holders? Yes, but could you compare it in ratio to Esau's possession of so-called people of color, his oppression and the means he took to extract forced free labor? In layman's terms, was the manner so-called black slaves were dealt with by their own the same as how treacherous and overtly wicked the nation of Esau Edom dealt with so-called black people? And that's an emphatic no. And the one thing we do have is the records there, i.e. eyewitness accounts, thousands to be exact, to prove it. 2 separate resources, one which is my usual go-to is Bartholomew de las Casas and his short account of the destruction of the Indies, where the so-called Dominican friar, Dominican we know today is to speak to the tribe of Simeon, who himself was a former slave owner. Las Casas detailed in his writings the evil manner Cristobal Colon and his conquistadors dealt with the Israelites in the Spanish colonized Caribbean. Las Casas said this: such inhumanities and barbarisms were committed in my sight as no age can parallel. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature that now I tremble as I write. He further went into depth on how they roasted and burned Israelites alive. For sport, the so-called Europeans would mow the so-called natives down with sword, chopping off their heads or attempting to see who could better split them in two from horseback, and how they would bash the brains of their babies against rocks and trees, or cut the fetuses from the bellies of our women, only to feed the proceeds of their handiwork to their dogs. The other source I would point to is Salakia. Is a book I also have posted to my website. It's called American Slavery as It Is, Testimony of 1,000 Witnesses, written by Theodore Dwight Weld in 1839. And I have yet to hear of a good reason why Esau, i.e. the white establishment, who as of late is attempting to destroy everything in relation to critical race theory, including the details of slavery and his efforts in white supremacy from their public record, would have admitted to said acts of wickedness in the first place if it was all based on folly and make-believe. As Elder Apostle Tahar always says, qui bono, the Latin for asking who benefits, comes to mind. The question remains, why would the so-called European, Esau Edom, whose birthplace was not in Europe, he was exiled to the mountains of Europe because the brown nations of the earth in the east where all life sprang from, got tired of his filth, his deceit, and his thievery. Why would he transport all this livestock by cargo slave ship when he already had ample bodied resources here in the Americas? First, let's go to the ultimate reasoning, and really the only reason that matters, because it was prophesied. In Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, the first 15 verses details how if Israel stayed faithful to the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Heavenly Father, they would be rewarded as a people. Verse 16 on down tells what would befall the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Indians eventually, and those who don't look like us, scattered across the other nations if we rebelled and were disobedient. They are known as the curses of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. Deuteronomy 28 also tells us those curses would be a distinguishable sign pinpointing who the people of Israel is, speaking to Israel today. In consideration of time, let's go right to the point. Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. All over YouTube, we men of the Lord from GMS go into depth of how we so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans are the only nation on earth that perfectly fit the curses and prophecies surrounding Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. Feel free, if interested, to do your own research. Deuteronomy 28 and 68. And it says this: And the Lord Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondsmen and bondswomen, and no man shall buy you. Now, anybody with a little study in a Bible atlas handy can tell you that given the location of the Israelites at that time, in order for them to get to Egypt, they would have no need of a ship. Egypt in the Hebrew is, again, Matazarium, which goes back to the root word tazawar, meaning to bind. Now look at the back of your American dollar bill. It's not hard to see where, in fact, we were bound. This scripture is speaking of the new Egypt in America, i.e. the new home where we would face bondage. Exodus 13 and 3. And Moses said unto the people, Remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of what? The house of bondage. Egypt with ships, meaning bondage. And no man shall buy you, meaning redeem you. Deuteronomy 32 and 6. The word bought there shares the same word in the Hebrew: buy, recover, and redeem. The Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, meaning the children of Israel, for their rebellion against Yahweh's law, statutes, and commandments, would be brought again into subjection, into slavery, again into bondage, like that they experienced in Egypt. And the American slave trade was just that. Again, Israel was brought under the subjection of a corrupt and godless people. This is why you have a pyramid on the back of the American dollar bill. What does pyramids have to do with America? Nothing. The American economy's major financial backing first came by way of enslaving the true children of Israel, courtesy of the resurged pagan, really Greco-Roman Empire. The lineage of Esau Edom, represented by the eagle, and the six-pointed star representing the so-called Jews, biblically known as Amalek, who are also of the same Edomite stock, also had their hand in our enslavement by paying for the vessels, like the one is the good ship Jesus, and the funding of the overall operation. And so now the $64,000 question on the pyramid, and the answer that speaks to why it was economically sound to transport we Israelites across the seas, despite the disease and like treacherous conditions. It's because we had the know-how and had developed the ingenuity to extract from the earth the other resource seldomly talked about, that too made America the economic superpower that it is today. We knew sugarcane, we knew tobacco, cotton, and what else? Gold. We knew where to find it, how to find it, how, most importantly, how to extract it. These are skills that were especially overdeveloped in West Africa. We Israelites who inhabited the Ivory Coast were more familiar than any on how to excavate gold, other precious metals and resources from the earth. That's why it made sense. That's why it was economically sound to bring we Israelites here, because if anybody could survive the long hours or the harsh measures, it was those Israelites who had already perfected it and had been doing it for some time. I did a lesson on the same subject not too long ago, so let's end this one the same way. Let's go to Isaiah the 13th chapter. Isaiah 13 and 12 is the point, but let's start at verse 11, and it says this: "And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity, the wicked being Esau, Edom at the forefront, the chief house of Amalek for their wicked acts committed against the apple of Yahweh's eye. We Israelites, we elect of Israel, starting with Yahweh Shai, abomination after abomination, speaking to the evil acts he carried out on the planet Earth. And I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease. I will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a man more precious than fine gold, even a man than the golden wedge of Ophir." The beginning of being made precious is the obtaining of the knowledge of this truth. 1 Samuel 3 and 1. "And the child," speaking of the prophet Samuel, "ministered unto the Lord Yahweh before Eli. And the word of Yahweh was precious in those days. There was no open vision. Where there's no vision, period, the people what? The people perish." That's Proverbs 29 and 18. These are the same conditions we Israelites, really you two-thirds, find themselves in today, speaking to these end times. The hopeful elect men of Israel who have been tried in the fire, Sirach 2 and 5 is the precept, who have faced adversity, the fire being the adversity, the trials and tribulations we have to go to in order for the best of our qualities to be brought out. We men of the Lord who face the fire in order to teach you this truth, walking away from our promising jobs and opportunities, losing our women and friends, more importantly, risking our lives day in and day out, telling you not to submit to the system of control the elite are hoping to implement and set up. We elect men will be the most sought after, never mind by you women, but by our own people and the other nations of the earth when all hell breaks loose, i.e. World War III to start. And the same people who think they are the most qualified to rule over you will be sought out because they won't have the answers. Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord Yahweh of hosts, the Lord of armies, and in the day of his fierce anger. Those hypersonic and ICBM missiles, accompanied by the chariots and lasers from the chariots of the Lord, are going to knock Babylon the Great, its ruling powers, its leading authorities, allies, and its forward thinking men back into the Stone Age with Fred Flintstone and you, the rest of you Yabba Dabba Doo Israelites, you Barney Rubbles of the flock, to recompense the world for all its wrongdoing against we Israelites of Yahweh and the Heavenly Father. There is no question the Bible can't answer, and no topic of conversation the men of the Lord has chosen can't address. The question to ask is, how in all this madness can a righteous man find his way? Hold your head, Israel. There is no equality. Esau can never be equal to us. At the same time, we are to remain humble. For those of us that have repented and come back to our power, keep your head down, meaning that stay out the way. Fast and pray. Pray without ceasing. Trust in Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai. That is the only way to find our way home. Call halal Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai B'Shem Akakwadash through the power and spirit. I hope you're edified. Double honors unto the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who do rule well and teach us 100% truth. Shalom to the hopeful elect. Remember, no test, no yab, and damn sure, don't take that. Shalom, Yasharallah. Again, shalom to the elect.